Weeks before I was supposed to leave for college, I discovered that my parents had spent every dollar in my college fund. The strange part wasn't that they admitted it. It was the silence before they did. I had placed my tuition invoice on the kitchen table and asked a simple question. "Can we transfer the first payment this week?" My mother froze with a knife halfway through an onion. My father stared at the dark television across the room. My older brother Tyler suddenly found something fascinating on his phone. No one answered, and in that moment, I knew my life had already changed. For as long as I could remember, my parents had talked about my college fund as if it were sacred. Every birthday card with cash, every Christmas envelope from my grandparents, every prize I won in school went into that account. When I started working at 16, I handed my mother 30% of every paycheck without complaining. I stocked shelves after school, cleaned spills, unloaded trucks, and worked every extra shift I could get because I believed I was investing in my own future. Whenever I asked how the account was doing, my father would smile and say, "You'll thank us one day." Meanwhile, Tyler lived by different rules. He was 4 years older, dropped out of college after 1 year, and somehow convinced everyone he was destined to become a successful entrepreneur. My parents bought him a Mustang for his 16th birthday. When he crashed it after leaving a party, they blamed the weather even though it happened in the middle of May. When he decided to start an online fitness business with his friend Mason, my father invested $10,000 without hesitation. They paid for his website, his equipment, even converted the garage into a warehouse. Whenever I questioned why so much money kept disappearing into Tyler's latest idea, my mother always gave the same answer. "You have your college fund." That sentence ended every conversation. Tyler got a new laptop because I had my college fund. Tyler flew to a business conference in Las Vegas because I had my college fund. Tyler moved back home without paying rent because I had my college fund. I stayed quiet because I believed my sacrifice would eventually be worth it. I graduated near the top of my class and earned a scholarship covering almost half my tuition. Combined with my savings and the money my parents had promised me for nearly 18 years, college finally seemed possible. Then the first invoice arrived. 14 days. That was all I had before payment was due. I looked at my parents again. "How much is in the account?" My mother whispered that they had been dealing with difficult circumstances. My father told me to watch my tone. Tyler refused to meet my eyes. Suddenly, every strange thing from the past year made sense. The late-night arguments, unopened bank letters, Tyler's business quietly falling apart, and my parents pretending everything was normal. "What happened?" I asked. My mother began crying. "Tyler's company failed." I looked at my brother. "You used my money?" "It was supposed to be temporary," he mumbled. "How much?" Nobody answered. I asked again. "How much is left?" My father finally looked straight at me. There was guilt in his eyes, but not enough to change the truth. "Nothing." At that moment, I realized the money wasn't the only thing I'd lost. The people I trusted most had looked me in the eye for months, accepted every paycheck I handed them, and lied every single time they promised my future was safe. For a moment, I couldn't speak. 18 years of birthdays, Christmases, overtime shifts, and promises disappeared with a single word. I looked at my mother, hoping she would tell me my father was wrong, but she only covered her face and cried. My father avoided my eyes while Tyler leaned back in his chair as if he wished the conversation would end. Finally, I broke the silence. "How long have you known?" Nobody answered. I asked how long. My father exhaled slowly. "Almost a year." I felt sick. "So every time I gave Mom part of my paycheck, every time you told me my future was safe, you already knew the account was empty." "We thought we'd replace it before college," my mother whispered. "With what?" Silence. Tyler finally spoke. "I told them I'd pay it back." I turned toward him. "With what money? Your business hasn't made a profit in months." His expression changed immediately. "You don't know everything." "No," I replied. "Apparently I don't." Dad stepped between us before the argument could get worse. "Your brother took a risk. Sometimes businesses fail." I laughed bitterly. "So you gambled with my future instead?" "We didn't gamble," he snapped. "We helped family." I stared at him. "No, you helped Tyler." Those 4 words seemed to hit harder than anything else I had said. My mother started crying again, but I couldn't stop. Years of frustration poured out all at once. When Tyler wanted a car, you found the money. When he wanted to start a business, you found the money. When he failed college, you supported him. When he crashed his Mustang, you paid for it. Every time he made a mistake, someone rescued him. But when I worked every weekend, graduated near the top of my class, and did everything you ever asked, you took the only thing that belonged to me. Nobody argued because nobody could. I walked upstairs, pulled an old duffel bag from my closet, and started packing. Clothes, my laptop, a few books, my acceptance letter, the lockbox where I kept my emergency savings, $432. That was everything I actually owned. Halfway through packing, my mother knocked softly on the door. "Can I come in?" She didn't wait for an answer. Her eyes were red from crying, and she held a thick envelope in both hands. "There's $2,000 in here," she said. "It's everything we could collect today." I looked at the envelope but never reached for it. "I don't want it." "You need it." "No," I said quietly. "What I needed was parents who kept their promises." She started crying again. "I never wanted this." "But you allowed it." Those 4 words broke whatever strength she still had. She sat down on the edge of my bed and buried her face in her hands. "I thought we could fix everything." "You had a year." She didn't answer because there was nothing left to say. I zipped my bag, picked it up, and walked downstairs. Dad was waiting near the front door. "If you leave now," he said, "don't expect us to help you." I almost smiled. "You already helped." I looked at Tyler one last time. "I hope I was worth it." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I hope destroying my future was enough to save yours." He didn't reply. Neither did my parents. I opened the front door and stepped outside. The evening air felt colder than it should have. Behind me was the only home I had ever known. Ahead of me was absolutely nothing. As I walked toward my car with 2 bags and $400 to my name, I realized something that frightened me even more than losing the money. For the first time in 19 years, I had no family left. I sat in my car for almost an hour without starting the engine. I kept staring at the front door, expecting my father to come outside and tell me there had been a mistake. I wanted my mother to run after me and promise they would sell the house, take out a loan, do anything to fix what they had done. I even wanted Tyler to admit he had ruined my life. None of them came. Eventually, the porch light turned off, and I realized I had been waiting for something that was never going to happen. Jake, one of my coworkers, let me sleep on his couch that night. He didn't ask questions. He handed me a blanket, pointed toward the living room, and simply said, "Stay as long as you need." Those 6 words meant more than every promise my parents had made during the previous 18 years. The next morning, I went straight to work and asked my manager, Lisa, if there were any extra shifts available. She looked at the dark circles under my eyes and quietly asked what had happened. I told her enough to explain why I suddenly needed every hour I could get. Without saying another word, she rearranged the schedule and gave me every overtime shift nobody else wanted. For the next 2 weeks, I barely had a life outside the grocery store. I unloaded trucks before sunrise, stocked shelves all afternoon, cleaned the building after closing, and slept whenever I could. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to slow down. Every paycheck reminded me that, unlike the money I had trusted my parents with, this money belonged only to me. 3 days before the tuition deadline, an email from the university appeared in my inbox. I expected the worst. Instead, I learned that another student had declined a merit scholarship, and the award had been offered to me because of my grades. Combined with my original scholarship, almost 70% of my tuition was covered. I still needed loans and my savings to pay the rest, but suddenly college wasn't impossible anymore. A week later, I moved into the spare room Ethan's uncle had rented to me for almost nothing. The apartment was old, the furniture didn't match, and the kitchen looked like it hadn't been renovated in 20 years, but it felt more like home than the house I had just left. Nobody there expected me to sacrifice my future for someone else's mistakes. College became my entire world. I attended classes during the day, worked evenings at a warehouse near campus, and spent nights studying until I could barely keep my eyes open. Every dollar was planned. Every hour mattered. Whenever I felt like giving up, I remembered my father's voice saying, "Nothing." It became the motivation that pushed me through every difficult day. Almost 2 months passed before my phone lit up with my mother's name. I ignored the call. Then she called again. A minute later, another message appeared. "Please answer." "Tyler is in serious trouble." I locked my phone without replying. 10 minutes later, another message arrived. "Your father refinanced the house to save his business." Then another. "Please, we need you." I stared at the screen for several seconds before putting the phone back into my pocket. For years, every family emergency had somehow become my responsibility. Tyler made the mistakes, but everyone expected me to understand the consequences. Not anymore. For the first time in my life, I chose to keep walking forward instead of turning around. I had no idea that the choices my parents were making at that exact moment would eventually destroy far more than my college fund. The messages stopped after a few weeks, and with them, the last connection I had to my old life. I buried myself in work and school, refusing to think about what was happening back home. 4 years passed faster than I expected. I graduated with honors, accepted a job at a fast-growing software company, and quickly earned a reputation as the employee who never complained and never missed a deadline. While others rushed home at 5 o'clock, I stayed late learning how the business worked. I wasn't chasing promotions. I was building the life I had almost lost. 3 years later, I left to start my own company. It wasn't glamorous. My first office was a tiny room above an old printing shop, and for months I was the owner, salesman, accountant, and janitor. Some weeks I questioned every decision I'd made, but unlike Tyler, I never built my future on borrowed money or empty promises. Every dollar I invested was one I had earned. Slowly, the business grew. 1 client became 10. 10 became 50. Before my 30th birthday, I employed more than 40 people and had finally paid off every student loan I had taken to replace the money my parents had stolen. 7 years after I walked out of their house, a thick envelope arrived at my office with no return address. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately. Inside were photographs of the home where I had grown up. A large for sale sign stood in the front yard. The garage was empty. The living room looked almost abandoned. The last photograph was of Tyler. He looked older, thinner, and completely defeated. On the back, my mother had written one sentence. "This was taken 3 weeks before he disappeared." My hands froze. I unfolded the letter. For the first time, my mother didn't defend their decisions. She admitted everything. Tyler's business had failed long before they told me. They refinanced the house, emptied their retirement savings, borrowed from relatives, and even took out personal loans trying to rescue him. Every time he promised he was one deal away from fixing everything, they believed him. Then, one morning, he packed a suitcase, emptied what little money remained in their bank account, and disappeared without leaving a note. Nobody had heard from him since. The last paragraph hurt more than I expected. "You once asked why we protected Tyler instead of you. The truth is that we believed you would always be strong enough to survive without us. We kept saving him because we thought he needed us more. By the time we realized our mistake, we had already lost both of our sons." I read those words 3 times before folding the letter. I had imagined this moment for years, convinced I would feel satisfaction when the consequences finally caught up with them. Instead, I felt nothing but disappointment. They had sacrificed one son trying to save the other, and in the end, they had lost them both. 2 days later, my assistant knocked on my office door. "There's an older couple here asking to see you." I looked through the glass wall into reception. My parents were sitting side by side. They looked nothing like the people who had watched me walk out of their house 7 years earlier. For the first time in my life, they looked afraid. I stood behind the glass for several seconds before walking into the reception area. My mother immediately stood up, but she stopped herself from trying to hug me. My father looked older than I remembered. His shoulders were bent, his hair was almost completely gray, and the confidence he had carried my entire childhood had disappeared. "I'm glad you came," my mother whispered. "I didn't come," I replied calmly. "You came to me." We sat in a small conference room overlooking the parking lot. Nobody spoke until my father finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry." I had imagined hearing those words for years, but when they finally came, they didn't change anything. My mother pushed a folder across the table. Inside were foreclosure papers, unpaid loan notices, medical bills, and police reports filed after Tyler disappeared. Everything they had owned was gone. "We're not here to ask for money," my mother said. "We know we don't deserve that." "Then why are you here?" She looked down at her hands. "Because you deserve the truth." My father took a deep breath. "The day you left, I told myself you'd be fine because you always figured things out. I kept telling myself Tyler needed us more. I didn't realize I was sacrificing the son who had never asked us for anything." The room fell silent. "I spent years wondering why I was never enough," I admitted. "You were always enough," my mother replied through tears. "We were just too blind to see who really needed protecting." I nodded slowly. "That's the problem. You didn't choose between your sons because one was better. You chose the one who kept making mistakes and expected the other one to survive without you." Neither of them argued, because they couldn't. After a long silence, my father stood. "We won't ask you to forgive us." My mother quietly added, "We just wanted you to know that we regret every decision we made." They turned toward the door. As my father reached for the handle, I stopped him. "Wait." They looked back. "I'm not giving you money." My father nodded. "I know. But I also refuse to become the kind of person bitterness would turn me into." A week later, my attorney arranged to pay my father's outstanding medical bills through an anonymous charitable trust. My parents never learned who had covered the debt. I also made sure they would never be evicted from the small apartment they had moved into after losing the house. They believed a local nonprofit had helped them. I never corrected them. Helping them wasn't about repairing the past. Nothing could do that. It was about making sure their mistakes didn't define the rest of my life. A year later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single photograph of Tyler standing outside a small repair shop in another state. On the back, in handwriting I recognized immediately, were 7 words. "I'm sorry. You deserved a better brother." There was no request for money, no excuse, no explanation, just those 7 words. I folded the photograph, placed it inside my desk drawer, and went back to work. People often ask whether my parents ever earned back my trust. The honest answer is no. Trust isn't rebuilt with apologies. It's rebuilt with years of actions, and some wounds simply last too long. But I also learned something I never understood at 19. The money they stole didn't ruin my future. It forced me to build one that belonged entirely to me. Looking back now, I no longer remember the balance of the college fund. I remember the lesson it taught me. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect your future will destroy it. And sometimes that's exactly what pushes you to build a life greater than the one they ever imagined for you.